Thank you. Sorry
Sorry
for
for
this
this
technical
technical
glitch
glitch
that
that
initially
initially
we
we
had,
had,
and
and
it
it
is,
is,
you
you
know,
know,
we
we
are
are
getting
getting
used
used
to
to
it.
it.
Can
Can
you
you
can
can
you
you
hear
hear
me
me
clearly?
clearly?
Is
Is
that
that
problem
problem
still
still
persisting?
persisting?
No, it's fine.
Because I'm using two devices, so that may be echoing again. So is it okay now? Is it? Can you hear me
It's
clearly?
okay. It's quite fine.
Can someone please respond? Okay, thank you. Okay, so the topic is from primitive to peasant. I reflect. Before that, I should extend my greeting. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunities, and thanks, Dr. Robert, for organizing this webinar. We have been talking about it for quite some time, but today we eventually have met and likely to discuss, have a fruitful discussion. I also thank St. John College and all participants for participating here, and hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion in the line of understanding primitive to peasant. So as we all know that I'm going to talk about, and especially since this talk was organized by history department, so I will try to you know focus couple of issues related to history and the development of peasant society, evolution of peasant society. The topic is from primitive to peasant, a reflection of society, economy, and culture. So I will make a couple of obvious points and try to make some analysis out of the statement that I'm going to make. There is a huge debate about, primitive communism, that there was a period of time that, you know, the society was so good and there was everything for everyone. Everyone was taken care of, and in that way, the primitive society was in a way glorified, and uh, so much talked about. Good things about the primitive society. Um, the point is, many a times when researchers try to understand something, reality, social reality are very complex, and they try to kind of just sideline the rough edges, and they try to focus on certain issues without looking at the difficulties or convoluted path of that society or difficult conditions of that society. So what I'm going to tell you is that, you know though the primitive society was not a perfect society, but what it ought to be, kind of made out to be in the discourse formation. Then we will look at that how over a period of time private property has emerged and subsequently acquired a hierarchical order, and private property uh, become the reason of inequality and disturbance and certain kind of fall of man in the modern society. So this idea of everything to everyone and everyone was taken care of, I will try to question some of these issues. But in this topic, I will try to focus some fundamental issues. So it may, because I heard that the students of different department also are joining, so this may benefit others also. So please have a look at this uh, PPT, because I roughly have prepared this PPT. So once you look at it, we can discuss. The first part I'm just keeping. The second part I'm going to talk about, but the following discussion, we try to understand the essential feature of the primitive economy as well as the reasons and processes by which they gave rise to the peasant economy. So there is a distinction between primitive and peasant economy that we try to understand in the following slide. How are this economy of peasant and primitive differ from one another? Additionally, it examines the social, cultural, economic, and religious aspect of the both primitive and the peasant economy. Now, primitive economy is basically an economy which is a subsistence economy, self-sustaining economy. So you can look at this slide, please. Is it visible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you can have a look at this slide. There is no control, private control of resources, and the resource is largely owned by the community. Okay. So there is an absence of labor economy. This is one point that I wanted to make through this, that both the means of production and the labor is owned by the people. They control and they manage the labor. Okay. So, except for this society, most society, the property has been privatized, and subsequently, once you privatize the property, some people will not have property and some people will have access property. And therefore, the people who do not have any property become the laborers. They do not have anything but to sell their labor and earn their livelihood. So this was a situation in many tribal society and primitive society. These are two different society. One should not confuse between tribal and primitive society, because there are many different ways tribal society have been modernized now. So when I am talking about primitive society, means these are simple society who derive their needs directly from the nature without involvement of any intermediary agencies. Okay? So there is no involvement of any intermediary agency. If I am making a fish hook, or if I am fishing or hunting or gathering, I'm directly doing that from the nature without involvement of buying some equipment from market and using it to get that resources. So that way, uh, the, they have control over their resources as well as their labor. So in that way, there was no labor economy as such. Whatever resources they have your forest, you have water, you have land, you have trees, plants, and agroforestry. Everything that is there, they gather, they consume, and of course, there were occasionally exchange of cooperative labor system. So if I am clearing my field, I may, make a group of couple of people. So while I'm clearing my field, we can together clear my field and plant seed there. And thereafter, we can extend that same courtesy to the people who participated in my field while clearing my field. So that way, these forms of simple exchange of labor did exist in primitive society, but there was no concept of selling of labor for wages wasn't there. It was absent. Okay, so that is a fundamental thing. Then comes the issue of resources, land, forest, and water. So the land, forest, and water also, so they communally own. So therefore, there was no privatization of resources. So some of our friends may be, kind of experiencing or witnessing that in this part of India. You can see that how gradually the properties, this land, forest, and water are becoming or getting privatized over a period of time. So that is one important point that one has to understand when making a distinction between primitive and peasant. Primitive surplus are exchanged directly among the group members of the groups. So in case of any surplus has to be understood in a cultural sense, not in a sense that you have an orientation of producing surplus, but sometimes a share of your grains or share of your produce, you sell it in the market or exchange in the market because of various reasons. Maybe there are cultural reasons, economic reasons, or any pressing needs, or some, just simply exchange of gift. Okay. So, but the course of but in the course of evolution, simple system have been superseded by complex system of control of means of production and appropriation of labor. So, in the passes of from hand, it passes from hands of primary producer into the hands of the owners. So gradually the property have moved, and subsequently the produce of that property also transfer to other social group. We'll talk more about this. If I can get a response, then it would be nice, because is it getting clearer? Is it making sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Now let's move to some of the point that about even the property. Suppose I inherit a property. Suppose I have a plot of land that my tribal groups, or a clan member, as a clan member, I have a plot of land that not necessarily means that is a private property, because sometimes they exchange it, sometimes they allocate it, sometimes eventually we occupy some plots of land. But I do not have ownership right over the land, though I occupy that land. One. Second, the most important part of primitive economy is what do I do with this, the products out of uh, what I do with the products. Suppose I have land and I grow grains, then what do I do with the grains, right? So the property now have two aspects. One is about any resources, land, forest, or water, whatever it is. The second is about what is the output, what is the product. So suppose I have a plot of land, and then I am cultivating that land, use and grow grains in that land. But now, after harvesting that grain, I'm also distributing this grain among the community members. Okay, so occasionally there are instances that people have occupied certain areas of fishing, certain fishing areas, or certain forest, or certain fruit trees, but that not necessarily result in the privatization of property, because they have the character of sharing it with the others. Okay, so it is not that unanimously they, once you have a plot of land or a place, a fishing pot, that whatever fish you get from there, you will only individually use it, or your family will use it, or sell it off in case of surplus. That doesn't happen. Some It is found that they often share it with the other members of the groups. So in that case, they may have a plot of land or a fishing spot, but they still share the resources produced from that private resources. Next is about the idea of surplus. Okay. So uh, please look at the PPT. The surplus is a very vague concept. In fact, if you look at the primitive and peasant, primitive man was constrained by nature and culture to produce beyond the subsistence. So we know that clearing the forest, clearing the bushes, and cultivating was a very tough task. So they required huge human power and animal power to do that. So they used to manage with bare minimum. So, and they didn't have the capacity or potential to alter the nature. So they have to acclimatize themselves. They need to subsist with the bare minimum resources. So subsistence is defined here is quite rigorously in physiological terms in the daily intake of food calorie required to balance the expenditure of energy a man incur in his daily output of labor. Okay. Basically, what it means that the amount of energy you need to remain active, productive, and socially desirable. Okay. What it means is that subsistence here means you need to consume as much food as to remain active, productive, and socially desirable. Now, these are three important cultural things. It is as much as a biological or physiological thing, it is also a cultural thing. So someone may look pale, someone may look thin, someone may be very weak, but you have to produce because there is no other option that if I am not active, productive, and desirable, then I cannot, remain in the society. I cannot just, continue because production is an important part of survival. It is not that I have surplus for 1 month, 2 months, or 6 months. It is an everyday thing. So in this phase of transition from primitive to peasant, one thing that you will understand that, you know, this caloric minimum or subsistence is strictly defined in terms of requirement of energy that we have to have for to carry out our everyday activities. So this is also called caloric minimum. Even the definition of poverty today in India subscribe to this idea of caloric minimum. Okay, so I have given you that this medical, Indian Council of Medical Science Research. You can look at it that we still have that 2400 calorie for the villagers and 2100 calories for the urban people. This is a very inhuman way of defining poverty because there is another definition of poverty by UNDP, which looks at the human development index. But in this case, it is a bare minimum. If you have sufficient, just surviving, as I told you, that active, productive, and desirable, then it is considered healthy. So this is, uh, and anything beyond that is considered surplus. Surplus also has to be understood in the sense of culture. Okay, so culture in the sense that suppose I'm living in a society, and then beyond or other than my own needs or biological need or food requirements, I need to produce something to contribute to the society and to make myself socially desirable in the sense that when we are living in society there are basic requirements, basic ritual ceremony that we need to perform. That also requires resources. In fact, that is becoming very, very expensive these days, even among the simple and tribal society and rural society. So suppose I am performing a life cycle rituals, death ritual, marriage ritual, birth ritual, that requires resources. If I do not do that, let's say I am living in a society and these are essential part of that society. Rituals revitalizes, replenishes the social system. Therefore, they have an important role in the society. It creates balance in the society. So if there is a birth ritual, death ritual, or marriage ritual, or puberty ritual, then I have to dedicate some resources to conduct that rituals. In that way, in that way, I am also dedicating some resources. So, what is the point here in the sense that when we say subsistence versus surplus, one has to understand that surplus doesn't mean that you produce over and above your consumption requirements. Sometimes you cut your own consumption, you eat less frequently. We have found there are studies that shows that people just before sowing season cut their food consumption. They eat less frequently to preserve next season seeds because the part of the grain is they use it for seed. So in that way it is a very strict sense of surplus where one has to balance both biological or physiological need along with the socio-cultural need of the society. Next is, yeah, the social surplus or social cost of living. Already I have told you this, that in addition to what I have, whatever little I have, I need to maintain this. So there are different kind of funds. You have replacement fund, you have rent fund, you have different kind of funds because if I have a plowshare, I need to, maybe in a year or two, I need to repair. Let's say one bull of mine died or got sick or something, then I need to do that. My clothes are now torn off or worn out. I need to, buy a new set of clothes. So all these things also constitute um, uh, part of that surplus, because we are talking about surplus here strictly in the sense of the just something other than the your physiological needs or biological needs. Replacement funds involve both culture and technical aspect of production, which means that you need to also fit, keep things fit. For example, there is a leaking roof, or maybe the utensils are breaking down, or the utensils or implements, agriculture implements are not working. So you need to uh, you know spend some resources to repair it, to mend it, and make it suitable for production. Now, this is an important issue of culture accumulation. From everyday utensil to the instrument of production is a prolonged process of culture accumulation. Once included, these items become essential part of everyday existence and hence culturally necessary. We started with stone implements and pottery cups, and just look around your house today. We have accumulated series of utensils to fulfill cultural expectation, right? So just look at your house. You have set of cups for drinking water, set of cups for drinking cold drink, set of cups for drinking coffee, maybe wine, maybe water, maybe. Just look at that a woman, maybe in Chhattisgarh or Odisha or Jharkhand, or even for that matter Northeast. She may be fetching water, storing water, warming water, drinking water with the same spot, right? So in that way, you can see, look at that, how culture accumulation happens and our everyday expense is increasing. Once a commodity, once an implement is part of our life, it becomes essential to us for two reasons. Maybe we need it, or because it is also socially desirable, right? I have this glass, right? I can use it for drinking coffee, tea, wine, anything that I do. But why do I need to bought so many sets of cups and glass and mugs to consume each item differently? So this process, anyway, I'm just this, I can give you a lot of interesting story regarding this, but I'm just making a point here that now, since these items, these utensils are part of our life, over a period of time we have accumulated a lot of things, and that becomes essentially part of our life. Uh, we cannot just not have it, because not only because you maybe you do not want it, but because it is also a cultural expectations that if someone visit your house, you just cannot give water in the mug, isn't it? So this is how this culture accumulation have taken place. And increasingly, these things, even if you fast forward and come to contemporary society, this day's society, most rural people and people in agrarian society, they are spending a lot on these issues of, you know, culture accumulations. The cost of living is becoming, so high because of one of the reason is the culture accumulation. Please, if you feel anything, you can speak, because sometimes when this webinar thing is like speaking to mirror. Okay. So I already have told you about ceremonial funds that, society is a web of social relationship, and routinely various ceremonies and rituals were performed to re-energize, reinvigorate this relationship. Certain rules and norms were instilled and therefore enforced to render the meaning and predictability in life. Okay. So if you look at marriage, it involves a lot of things, not just passage of spouse from one house to another, but also winning of goodwill, trust, and consumption and conspicuous consumption. We do a thorough study of when we are marrying of our daughter or sister or brother with some other family member, then we just do all this survey, which means that you need to you need to consume and display your consumption to the others also. This is increasingly becoming a visible thing across society, across social class. So this also costs something in the cost of living. This expenditure vary from society to society at different period of time in the same society. So you can look at that at a point of time, our cost of living in terms of these social ceremonies were very little. Very recently, I was visiting my field area, and if you see that many people, in terms of birthday, in terms of puberty ritual, in terms of many small rituals, they just used to call people, couple of their friends and relatives, and they used to celebrate. Now they are elaborately calling DJ, they are calling, a different kind of, cooks and, people to, celebrate those rituals, which causing um, another additional burden in the cost of living. So the rent fund, as I said, gradually the economy get into certain kind of larger system, and if you are part of, if you are using irrigation system of the state, or if you are using land also you need to pay rent. So in both cases, or in many cases, you need to pay some kind of tax. The entire point of this 2 3 slide is that how do we understand their subsistence and surplus? That is the main point of this entire slide. So one has to understand that surplus is not something you produce over and above what you consume. Sometimes you know you need to take a share of your own consumption, eat less frequently, and remain undernourished, malnourished, to fulfill your social obligations. Now coming back to the moving to the from peasant to the primitive to the peasant economy. When it comes to peasant economy, land acquire a very important place. So you can please have a look at this slide. Land increasingly acquired significant in the subsequent stages of economic development. Initially, there was no dearth of land, but the primitive man was constrained by simple technology. Clearing forest for cultivation required enormous man and animal power. So with the simple tools, men cultivate only small patches of land. So due to lack of advanced technology, you can now see, if you uh, go to Punjab, Haryana, or any part of India, except for maybe tribal regions, including northeast regions, you will see that this part of India, you will see that people are employing all forms of modern technology, and thousands acre of land can be cultivated in hours or days. So anyway, the point is here, I'm looking at this occupation of land and how the evolution of land use and evolution of society in sync with each other, or there is a coordination, or uh, you know, there is a relation between these two. So one is following system. So different way they cultivate the land. You can see we call it Sweden slash and burn cultivation, Zoom cultivation, all that. Long-term following system, sectoral following system, and short-term following system. Long-term following system means during this time the land was plenty, so many different way people use their this land. Once you clear the forest, cultivate for a year or two, and then leave it for a long time, so the land get fertile and renourished. And after many years, you may come back to that land. Sectoral following, no, let's go to short-term following. Short-term following indicates that, according to the scholars, that the land was getting scarcer. So people, frequently move from one plot to another to cultivate. So the period of long and short term following is gradually diminished. The second point, sectoral following, is interesting because sectoral following means you clear a big plot of land and you make sectors, A, B, C, D sectors. And couple of years you cultivate the sector A, then you leave the sector A and move to sector B, and then to sector C, then to sector D, and eventually you come to sector A. Now, what is the social significance or historical significance of these things? It is because this is where settlement started growing. Okay. So if you look at, I have a, I think, slide I'll show you. Just a minute. Yeah. See the Indian village settlement type. I'm just making a kind of jump from the primitive to peasant to the modern India. So please bear with me. Okay, here. So you can see that the settlement type in India, type of settlement pattern in rural India, nucleated settlement, linear settlement, and scattering of homestead or cluster settlements. Now, what you understand is that as you know, initially when people start cultivating, they start living near the land because they need to guard the forest, they need to stay near the forest because there was a lot of wild animal. There are others who wanted to destroy or maybe take away your crops. So one has to settle near the field. Now if you look at long-term following system, sectoral following system, and short-term following system, in both long and short-term following system, people were moving from one place to another. But in case of sectoral following system, there was some sort of semi-settlement. You need to settle there because the entire many years you are cultivating and staying in one place because one sector A, you cultivated for 1 or 2 years, then you move to sector B, then to sector C, then to sector D. In that way, now you are settled. So unlike the two other systems where you are still mobile, still transhuman, still nomad, in this case, the settlement become more clearer and established. Okay. So there is this explanation that why did they leave the field? So most of you know that land fertility diminish over time, crops attack animal, insects, and even new weeds come. So they move from one place to another. Now, permanent cultivation, or this is also called hydraulic system. One of the fundamental issue with the hydraulic system or permanent cultivation is water supply for the growing crops. Field must be, and in this period, the field, it requires again, irrigation is not just simply kind of, irrigating land. It requires enormous power because if you look at any slash and burn type of cultivation, the land is very uneven, right? So it is only depending, these are rain-fed agriculture. So it is the rain is falling from above and the crops is absorbing it. In case of irrigation, you need to level the land. You need to even out the land. Then only the water can, reach out to every corner of the field. Which means that what I wanted to say is there is an enormous requirement of labor. The moment this has happened, then the requirement of both human and animal labor was extensive. So the point analysis, I already have told you that the settlement acquired semi-permanent character because of the nature of agriculture. So I don't need to, I think, explain this. You just need to look at this. These are three types of settlement found across India. Nucleated settlement, were the most common type of nucleated settlement found all over the country. A tight cluster where you can see that the houses are located in the middle of the village and the agriculture field are surrounded the outside. Linear settlement, house are strung out, each surrounded by its compound. And the scatter or homestead. So forest area, you will have this kind of settlement. So this in a way shows that how this agriculture or production system to an extent determine the settlement system. Not always, but initially it definitely has impacted the settlement system. Now, since land is an important issue, we will just look at, and also for the benefit of students of sociology and especially history, we'll look at, I jump into certain kind of the land ownership issue. So land ownership, management and inheritance. Evolution of land use point to the fact that over a period of time, some persons or group of persons claim right of to land used by the peasantry. Such person exercise domain over the land. Domain means ultimate ownership or control over the use of a given area of land. Okay. So now from free land, you saw that there was sectoral following, there was long-term, short-term following, there was plenty of land. Over a period of time, the land is now in the control of some people or group of people, or can say a very rudimentary state, very simple state system. Now the land is possessed by them. In this case, there are three types of ownership you will see, and more or less you'll find this in India also during the Mughal time, prior to that, and after that also. More or less, this kind of inheritance systems and domain system you will find. Domain may not be an appropriate word here, but this is the kind of land control and management system still continuing. One thing I just wanted to clarify before this is that these are not mutually exclusive system, that if one system exists, the other do not exist. Maybe one in one state or in one region, you may have all these three systems. So the first one is about patrimonial or feudal domain. Land is placed in the hand of the lord, who inherit the right to domain of as a member of kings. So you know how this kings and landlords inherited that property. Even in feudal Europe, you have clergy, nobility, and commoners. So the nobility, the landed gentry inherits the land just because by being by being virtue of the member of that group, that kin group or kinship group. Second is about plebeian domain, prebendal domain. Sorry, it is more or less the same, but this ownership, it is not heritable. It cannot be inherited from one person to another. Second is about that these are people, officials, who draw tributes from the peasantry in the capacity of government servants. So in many states of India, you have this Deshmukh, Dora, Shetia during Mughal time collecting tax. So these are literate people collecting tax from uh, different regions of India. So they were at their official capacity, they were collecting text. The yeah. So in these two cases, what you see is that I have a graph, so I will show you. Then I'll come to this again. Okay, so this is the hierarchy. It creates the land ownership creates a pyramidal structure where the higher lord exercise power over the lower lords, and the lower lord exercise power over the peasants. But this is just a simply three kind of hierarchy. But there were layers during the British time also. Suppose you have 50,000 acres of land. Then how do you manage? It is impossible, humanly impossible. So the higher lord give it to two, three lower lords. Then those two, three lower lords again appoint another set of lower lords. And then those people again appoint another set of lower lords. And then eventually the peasant cultivate. Now, what is the point here? The point is that the system of appropriation, exploitation, and domination. Okay. So the higher lord may impose, let's say, 10% tax. In between the higher lord and the peasant, there are two, let's say, lower lords. Each of these people are definitely not doing any social service. They will impose their own tax, maybe 2% more, or 3% more, or 5% more. So when the state impose 10% tax, by the time it reaches to the peasant, it becomes 15 or 20% tax or land rent. And therefore, the peasant were crushed during this time. So throughout the history, even today, where there is peasantry, where this land rent system works, the peasant has to bear all the burdens. Okay, so this is what it looks like, and even today, the agriculture sector more or less appears like this only. Maybe the terms and conditions of farming have changed, but the hierarchy more or less remain the same. Now, coming back to this domain again, patrimonial, prebendal, and mercantile domain. So, both in patrimonial and prebendal domain, you will see that these lords are exercising power over the lower lords and subsequently the peasant. Now, mercantile domain creates a kind of entire different situations. Land is no more a kind of just meant to produce something, but acquire the characteristic of a commodity that can be sold, bought, or exchanged. And this has drastically altered the conventional concept and use of land as it produced crops to generate income as opposed to subsistence crops. So increasingly, farmers, this land acquire this character. But most important aspect of this, what I find is that the land traditionally, conventionally understood as an given priority, given weightage, given importance for their fertile character. How fertile the land is, in that way their price, their demands, their requirements were sought for. Now it has entirely changed. And land, today, if you look at, it is not about the fertility quality of land, but the strategic location where the land is located. Now, because of maybe real estate or housing or road or bridge or dam or anything that the government project or something is running, it acquires a different character. So this is how the character of land also have changed over a period of time. So I hope you understood this hierarchy also here. I try to simplify this. Now, I'm just jumping to the land reform issue. I'm moving fast forward. Okay. The objective of land reform. So, usually, when we talk about land reform these days, and even recently concluded farmer movement, you must have heard about that. There is little talk about land reform as such. It is more about uh, you know, more about the farmer getting state benefits or benefit from the market. So they want to increase minimum support price. They want concession on inputs like fertilizer, pesticide, uh, and all that. But there is little talk. There is little talk almost about 1980s. This discussion on land reform has, kind of diminished. Okay, thank you. So the fundamental issue of land reform, please look at this. The first part of the slide is the land inequality is the root of social, economic, and political inequality. As a result, land reform entails not only land distribution, but also dismantling of the undemocratic, inequitable system of resource distribution, feudal power structure, and caste system. It also an important promise made in the Constitution, which has the potential to liberate the weaker section, women traditionally excluded group. So land inequality is the power inequality. Land concentration is also perpetuation of patriarchy, caste system, and feudalism. So it is not just about distributing land. So whether the distribution of land will eradicate poverty or not, but the most important part of land distribution is that dismantling of the power structure, the patriarchal structure, the undemocratic structure that exists in Indian society. That is the fundamental issue. Now, if you look at all these titles, since I am running short of time now, so these all titles were Jamindar, Jagidar, Mahalwar, Raitwar, all these titles were abolished. But according to data, this survey is done by one of the prominent economists, agrarian economist, Utsa Patnaik. The land record of 1953-54 shows the following patterns. The Jamindar, who has 70% of arable land, who constitute only 15% of population. Kisan, on the other hand, who translated as farmer, 24, 25. And the Mazdoor, or the people who are toiling on the land, have only ownership over 6% land, but their population is 60%. Okay. So please remember this. The next point I'm going to discuss is relevant here. Now, the objective of land reform. The land reform addresses four major issues: ceiling and redistribution of private land as well as fallow land, abolition of intermediary, tenancy regulations, and consolidation of disparate land holdings. Okay. So initially they said that they will, take out land who has access land and distribute among the landless, and also surplus fallow land that is lying. There was plan to redistribute them. Abolition of intermediary and tenancy, as we saw that hierarchy, that there were many intermediaries, and also the tenancy regulations, where easily these tenants, the people who cultivate the lands, were evicted, and therefore some certainty were given to them. The consolidation and disparate land holdings is another important, because the land is getting disintegrated and it is not feasible for cultivation. So increasingly there is a kind of need to consolidate plots of an individual in a particular place. So these are four fundamental issues. These are broader issues. Usually when we talk about land reform means land distribution, but if you look at the history, geography, and politics of land reform, these are four fundamental issues that covers almost everything. The, the implementation, fall flat. It was not, kind of successful. But couple of points that I wanted to make, and maybe I will finish with this only. That the most important point is, one is that people not giving up their land or giving up their land. They it is not easy to give up your land, right? But more than that, according to scholars, and I also strongly feel that, besides the land issue, that whether you wanted to give it your surplus land or not, because the state already have promised and have initiated legislation also. The second important point, according to scholars, is very important, that once you give your land, then it creates problem. It creates a labor scarcity. Just look at this picture. 70% people, 15% people, 70% of land, which means that these 70% landholders or 15% people neither have required manpower, nor do they employ their family members to carry out agriculture, which means that they permanently depending on the labor of others or hired labor, right? Please try to understand this equation. This is important in terms of students of all social sciences. So here, 15% people occupying 70% of land. And this 70% landed gentry, they do not perform any agriculture work. They usually hire workers. If you understand this now, and we go back to these conditions, that if you give the land to the landless, then they will have some land. And once you have some land, why would you regularly go and work on others' field? If I have a plot of land or two plots of land, I will prefer to work on my field. Maybe some other times I can go and work on some others. I can sell my labor and go and work on some others' field. But if I have land, I will preferably work on my field than working on others' field. And this is what Patnaik said, that to retain this kind of inequality of land holding and the production system, you need to have a large chunk of population without land. Then only they can come to work in your field anytime you call them, because they do not have any other source to derive their livelihood. So therefore, you just look at 60% people have only 6% of land, which means that barely have any land. And since they are landless and living in rural area, they have to sell their labor for work. So that way, the point I'm making is that giving, redistributing the land and restraining to that land distribution is one thing. But once you give that land, there will be a huge labor crisis for the landed gentry who permanently depend on the labor of others. And therefore, both the things were not successful because giving land then creates a labor problem, expecting that even if we give land, the impending danger is labor scarcity or labor problem. And that is why one of the major obstacle of land reform is not just about land ceiling and redistribution, but also about the impending labor crisis. I think I'll stop here. There are a couple of slides, but we can discuss if any point that you want to discuss.